Hey everybody, Ash here. Welcome back to Gents. Today, I am joined with Richard Irfan. He's the owner, perfumer of the brand Precious Liquid, and we're going to be kicking off a series where he and I join up and talk about fragrances. So he's going to be able to give you the point of view from an actual professional perfumer and kind of help break down like what's in a fragrance, the quality of a fragrance, what causes a fragrance to smell the way it smells, everything from like that perspective. So I'm really appreciative that you're even doing it because I know it's, you got to take a lot of time out to do it. And it's not something that a lot of perfumers would even actually do. So thanks for that. But today we're going to be tackling a couple of huge ones, a couple of huge fragrances, Aventus and Club de Nuit Intense Man, because Aventus is like the number one biggest niche fragrance, I guess. As far as men's fragrances goes, it's the one that everybody says, the king of fragrances. And so price wise, this one is retail for a 100 mil, $495. And you can find it at discounters, maybe around 275 for that size. And Club de Nuit Intense Man from discounters, you're looking at it like $25 to 30. So pretty big price difference. Aventus about 10 times more expensive from discounters, and at retail it's closer to probably 16, 17 times more expensive. So yeah, now let's talk Club de Nuit Intense Man, which is super cheap. Like I said, this is about $25 from a lot of places. It goes up to about 30. It is the most popular Aventus clone, alternative, whatever you want to call it, inspired by fragrance by Armoff. So this one, I'll give you like the layperson rundown. um, it is known for having better performance than Aventus, for being a little rough in the opening, for having kind of like a more lemony opening, and for having more of a smokiness as it dries down compared to like modern day Aventus. So that's kind of like if you were going to ask just your average fragrance person, that's what they would say. They'd be like, oh, the opening is not as great, but the dry down is really good and it's got great performance. That's kind of the thing with this one.
Yeah. So for me, I'm going to do like something that passed my mind. Like, have you go to parks, like Central Park, and you have those guys. They do your face, like
Oh,
a
like a caricature?
Yeah, a caricature. And for me, it's like that's really what it is. This fragrance, it's a caricature of Aventus. So they took like, for example, you're talking about that the back, and they took the cheapest molecule that's in the fragrance that has a lot of power. It's called isobutylquinoline. It's like a synthetic ingredient, and they have like twice or three times the amount of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's kind of a caricature for me. It's like, for me, it's a bit overwhelming, it's a bit overwhelming. And then you talked about the citrus, and here again, they went really cheap. They say bergamot too expensive. How can we replace it by a citrus that's much less expensive, probably 10 times less expensive? And they went with a kind of lemony top note, and then they put some kind of bergamot base, that too. It's like
The
very
synthetic
cheap,
one.
synthetic, and they make it like with just a few ingredients, and it kind of smells like it, but it's very, very different.
This happens a lot with Aventus fragrances where you smell it and you can tell that it's inspired by Aventus, but it doesn't really smell like Aventus. But it has like enough similarities where you smell it and you go, okay, it's kind of Aventus, but not exactly. But some people prefer that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that they didn't compromise is that they put the 10% of Ambrox. So that molecule that's really expensive, they had to put it in, because if not, they would not, the relationship with Adventus would not even be there, So they had to put the 10% of Ambrox inside, So that they put in. The pink pepper they did not put in, so they put some LME. They kind of put some cheap peppery notes. That's why it's so harsh in the top note. It's not that pleasant. The top note is really, but I mean, one thing is that they got performance here, you know. I mean, the patchouli is there too, you know. So, you know, it's like a caricature, you know. It's not the most beautiful thing to look at, but boom, it's kind of punchy.
Yeah,
So,
it gets your attention.
so yeah. So, you know, I think they did the job and doing a pretty good caricature, you know, and keeping the elements that were non-negotiable. They had to keep them. They kept them. Any other question? What do you think? Like, what's your opinion on the Club de Nuit? I mean,
Yeah, so the opening I've always thought was a little rough. When I first tried it, it reminded me of like a lemon cleaner that you would spray in your house or something and like wipe down your furniture with because it had that like sharpness when you spray it on. Because there are some times where a sharper citrus is okay if it's like an older style fragrance, maybe like an Eau Sauvage type scent, and you have a little sharper lemon, it works there. But this is more like abrasive where it kind of tingles your nose. And so I never really liked the opening. And once it dries down, I always thought it did get better. And it became more of like a smoky-ish kind of Aventus scent with a little bit of like a sweet undertone to it that had really good performance. And in the air, it does smell a lot better than up close. I think that is the case for a lot of fragrances that are on the cheaper side, is when you smell them really up close, you'll kind of be like, oh, it smells a little cheap. But then when you move around and you catch a whiff of it, you're like, oh, that's pretty nice. It's like when it gets diffused in the air, it kind of takes some of the edge off a little bit. And so Club de Nuit for me was always that, you know, the most popular Aventus clone. And it's really good for compliments when you hit the dry down. I've thought that there were generally other clone fragrances that were maybe a little bit closer as far as like what Aventus does. So to me, it's almost like Club de Nuit Intense Man is an Aventus twist or something like that, like Aventus with a twist, where, like you were saying, they didn't directly do what Aventus does. They took like the structure, I guess, and then they were like, well, we can't do this the exact same, so let's change it and do kind of this other stuff and then say it's our own thing. Is kind of how I've approached it. As far as like ingredient quality, I don't know anywhere near obviously what you do, so I'm just kind of basing it off of when I smell it. Does it smell really put together? Like, is the blend really nicely done? Does something stick out kind of sharp? Because if it does, then I'll be like, why is it sticking out so much? Like, shouldn't it kind of be more harmonious with what's going on? And so when I smell that, sometimes I'll be like, oh, what's, you know, something here is a little off to me. But that's just how I personally kind of approach things.
yeah, I mean, you shed the light on something I didn't think before, but you're right. The citrus that you have in some kind of cleaners, that's why people I think don't like too much sharp citrus notes in the US in
Oh,
particular.
yeah, that could be
You
because
know?
it's in like all of the cleaners. So that's, I guess you get used to thinking of it that way.
Yeah, so for you, it's like, okay, that's good to kind of do the job there, but then I would not put that on myself. It's too aggressive, you know. So people have that in the back of their mind. So for them, you have to come with either mandarin or bergamot, you know, those two. And when you were talking about Eau Sauvage has a fair amount of bergamot, but also has some lemon as well. When it's a blend, then it becomes kind of nicer. You know, let's say if you have a 15% of bergamot and you have like 3% of lemon, then it's acceptable. You know, it kind of, in an Eau Sauvage, you have a more of that ratio, you know.
Mm-hmm.
While here, clearly in the Club de Nuit, they just wanted to replace the bergamot and try to find out, even using some aldehydes, they can be a little sharp too, you know. So yeah, I think that's what it is. But another thing that you said that's very remarkable is that actually fragrance in the air, you know. Because the whole thing is that when you shoot the fragrance for the first time, you put it on skin and you smell it like that, but that's not really realistic, you know. What happened most of the time, you spray the fragrance and it just lives its life on the air. I think nowadays people are just too obsessed about the fragrance smelling good on their skin, just putting their nose on their skin, and that's wrong because nobody does that. I mean, and especially not for the top notes. Sometimes you can have some things happening in the top note, and you would discard a fragrance that is actually an amazing fragrance.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
the dry down ultimately is more important than the opening because that lasts longer. So if the opening is like a fleeting 5 minutes, but it smells amazing, and then the dry down is no good, then that doesn't really work. But a lot of people do obsess over the opening, or they do what we were saying and just constantly like this, which as you're moving around, nobody's gonna come up to you and smell you like that. So Club de Nuit Intense Man for about $25, like quality wise, in your opinion, it makes sense at that price point, or?
I mean, again, just for the price of the Ambrox, I'm going to say yes, because 10% of Ambrox, that is very expensive molecule, and they did not compromise. They put the 10% of Ambrox. So me, just for like using that ingredient in that level already, it's not a cheap fragrance. It's not a cheap fragrance. They compromise on everything else, but just for the Ambrox, I would say, you know what, you get a good deal. And the performance again, it's really important, and they nailed it. It's more performant than the Creed. We
Yeah.
all agree. We agree on that. It's more performant. If you don't want to go more subtle, refined, and you want to go for something really performant, then I would say that's the way to go. It's doing a great job, and that's why it's so successful.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like I was saying, a lot of people will prefer Club de Nuit Intense Man because they do want something that's going to project longer, last longer, and bang for your buck wise, it's barely over $20. So at that point, it's not even a purchase you really have to think much about. So it makes a lot of sense that people would really enjoy it. And like I said, in the air, in the dry down, it smells good. It gets positive attention, and people are always looking for that. Like your average person wants a fragrance that gives them confidence and makes them smell good. And if you can get that for like $25, a pretty good deal.
Especially I think like a younger crowd,
Yeah.
a younger crowd, like a teenager who wants to get a fragrance that's not going to break the bank and is going to draw attention, as you were saying, then it's definitely the right fragrance. It's definitely a fragrance that's going to do the job really well. So yeah.
So between the two, which one would you take, I guess, considering everything?
So so personally, I really believe that both fragrances, I would use both. If I'm more in the mood where I'm a bit more rock and roll, and I would just like go with the Club de Nuit. I would say, you know what?
Yeah, I think for me, if you just want the best bang for your buck, that Club de Nuit is a much bigger bang for your buck. If you want the one that's probably going to grab the most attention, probably go Club de Nuit Intense Man, just by the sheer performance, more people are going to probably smell it. But thank everybody, or I want to thank everybody, I can't speak English, for for hanging out with us here until the end. I want to thank Richard especially for taking the time to do this because he's a busy guy.
Thank you, Ashton, for this great opportunity to be able to interact with you. I love to do that always. And yes, a lot of fun doing and trying to give as much information we can to the viewers,
Yeah.
so they can understand better the quality and of what's in the barrel that they are purchasing, making sure they make the right purchase and they know why they're doing it.
Thanks, Richard. He'll be back on the channel super soon. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Stay safe out there.
Take care.